Hello, good morning to those in Brazil. Good evening to those in China. My name is Mariana Albuquerque. I am a project manager at the Brazilian Center for International Relations, CEBRI. Today, I welcome you to the 25th meeting of the China Analysis Group, an initiative of CEBRI's Asia program, coordinated by Ana Jaguaribe, CEBRI's trustee, Ambassador Marcos Caramuru, CEBRI's international advisor, and Philip Young, CEBRI Senior Fellow. I would like in that regard to thank you the support of BOCOM BBM, who has been a strong partner of the group's activities since the beginning. Since 2017, the China Analysis Group has been gathering specialists on broader topics of the international agenda, such as China's financial system and geopolitical competition in Asia. Today, our main topic of discussion will be the post-COVID city, the ongoing spatial and technological reconfigurations in China and the world. To that, I have the honor to welcome Professor Yung-Ho Chang and Professor Carlo Ratti. Professor Chang has an outstanding career in arts and architecture, winning prizes such as the UNESCO Prize for the Promotion of Arts. He is the founding partner and principal architect of Atelier Feixiang Jiangsu and headed the architecture department at MIT. Professor Ratti also teaches at the MIT, where he directs the Sensible City Lab. He is founding partner of the International Design and Innovation Office Carlo Ratti Associati. To moderate the panel, I would like to invite and pass the floor to Philip Young, CEBRI Senior Fellow and founder of Instituto Urban, an institution dedicated to the analysis of urban planning, who has been working closely with CEBRI to develop that agenda. Thank you and have a wonderful debate. Philip, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mariana. Carlo and Yung-Ho, I'm really delighted to be with you here today. Thank you so much for sharing your time and thoughts with us, with the CEBRI community. Our topic today is the ongoing spatial and technological reconfiguration of cities. And we are very privileged to have two professionals who are at the forefront of practice and research with an outstanding production both in academia and in the built environment across cities around the world. But what makes our conversation here very promising today is that Yung-Ho and Carlo have very different points of departure. I would even dare to say that Carlo and Yung-Ho have opposing intellectual viewpoints. Of course, I am dramatizing here a bit to spice up our conversation, but on reviewing their portfolios of works, I think it is fair to say that Yung-Ho's approach starts with a spatial territorial reasoning that derives into technology in a later moment. Whereas Carlo's approach starts from a reflection on the technological tools to later derive to details of spatial organization. I hope this is a reasonable provocation to both of you. And along these lines, let me perhaps invite you, Yung-Ho, to jump in first. I know that you have developed ideas on the future organization of cities in light of the new post-pandemic sanitary demands. Is that right? Would you please share your thoughts on these particular ideas? Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you, Philip. So let's see if Carla and I can make it the fight club. Okay, let me share my screen first. Okay, all right. Okay, as Philip said, I do have a position on this debate, which is about where we are with urbanization as mankind, a big topic. Anyway, so at this point, we all considering two possibilities. One is that to embrace dense urbanity as we have been for a long time, And the other possibility is to consider, or rather reconsider, the urban sprawl. So I like to take you to take a very quick look of, first of all, the original urban sprawl, the American suburbia, the bedroom town. You all know these very well. But let me show you the Chinese version of it. This is a typical development. And then you see it's always isolated, gated community. The density, as you see, is much higher, of course, than the American version. And then, however, this picture may not give you really the full extent how our cities in China today are basically filled with these kind of our urban sprawl. That's how a city would look like. Well, the most new Chinese cities do look like this. So the question is, for me, are two, in fact. One is, how do we protect ourselves against pandemic? The other one is that, how do we achieve livability? I don't see these two questions are really at odds. I think that these kind of a city, the one I'm showing on the screen here, it's not very livable to begin with. So maybe there is some advantage for these kind of a city during a pandemic crisis. But yet, I wanted to show you one more slide of a city I know very well. I have a feeling Carlo would know it also very well. This is Shanghai. This is in the center of the city. But if you look at the city, it's really not for people. It's, of course, you see a lot of automobiles, and then you see a bit of vegetation, greenery, really as decoration. And then you don't see cyclists. You hardly see one single soul walking. So I don't believe that kind of a city is where we really want to live. Meanwhile, in China, actually exactly in Shanghai, we still have neighborhood which looks like this. So you see a lot of cars parked there, but also you see people walk down the street, people having their lunch on the street, shops on the ground floor, and then apartments above. A lot of trees, of course. Trees are taller than the buildings in some of the cases still. So for me, the question is, how can we make a city like this particular neighborhood of Shanghai into also a place that would help people to fight against COVID or other pandemics? So that is the true question, rather to say, you want this or you want a fortress against pandemic, which doesn't have any of the pleasure of a city. So I'm also exaggerating a bit, hopefully. Also, I don't think Carlo need my provocation. He's gonna tell us about his point shortly. But anyway, so my argument is that, so recently we were able to complete a project which was conceived before COVID-19. It's about making an industrial park also in Shanghai a more livable place, which looks like this. So I don't think the buildings are terribly remarkable, but the way we planned it, you can see is these small blocks. They are 40 by 40 meters, and they are surrounded by covered walkways, so that it's very, very comfortable for people to walk around. And there are pedestrian streets with people have places to sit and enjoy maybe a cigarette and so on. And then there are also streets for cars. So the whole idea is that people come here to work. They spend 8 hours of their life here at least. So they should be able to enjoy life while working. So at lunchtime, they can, on the ground floor, this is an early photo, there are going to be a restaurant and so on. They can walk to a restaurant. They can meet friends. So social, cultural, commercial amenities for me is very important for the urban dwellers. So of course, again, back to the question, what about pandemic? So my thinking is that now we have seen how a big city locked down last year, or maybe even more recent. But what if, let me show you a picture. This is this industrial park in Shanghai, in the aerial photo. What if each block is as small as 40 by 40 meters? However, it's self-sufficient, it's mixed use. So there is commerce and there's some other facilities, social and what, so that if pandemic breaks out in a city like this, so we only need to lock down a small block instead of a bigger area of a city. So I'm making a very ideal case for these cities consist of mini block, but I think it's an idea maybe we should entertain as more seriously. So what happens to internet? Well, we do need to have internet. I think internet and the physical city are complementary to each other. If you are going going through a lockdown or quarantine somewhere, you're going to need internet no matter what, even in a single building. And then meanwhile, of course, the physical experience of the city, going to a cafe to use your computer is also different if you always just use it in your bedroom. But anyway, and Carlo knows my viewpoint very well, since we're old colleagues and friends. So anyway, so this is the last slide. This is what we have built for this particular part of Shanghai, but I can see do a more a bigger version, but more residential, more mixed use version of it one day. And then I think there is some advantage for it as a way to fight against pandemics. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was very interesting to see. The images were very telling, and your thoughts are very interesting about mini blocks and secluding the mini areas for sanitary purposes. That's a very interesting idea. Let's discuss this further. Carlo, you have been very much involved in a sort of a high-end agenda of digital technologies applied to the urban environment. Let me start by asking you how you see the impact of new technologies on the way we organize cities. I know that there are many layers to this question, many privacy issues and ethical issues are in the air, but perhaps you could share your thoughts on how technologies such as artificial intelligence and sensible device are now shaping our urban spaces.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Philip. And first of all, I want to say, actually, Junko and I As Jungo mentioned, we go back a long way, and we agree on most things about architecture. But today we'll play a bit more. We'll try to follow your game and try to be on opposite positions. I think, but I want to say before that, I want to say one thing we all agree about is, I love Jungo's work and the ability to really look at architecture starting from people and from nature. And I think that what we need to do is find a better marriage between the natural and the artificial. And that's what we're trying to do. And for instance, looking at digital is a way to do that. Digital allows us to bring intelligence, artificial intelligence into buildings, into the built environment. It is a way that through digital, architecture can behave like a living organism. And so that's really one of the dimensions we're exploring of this kind of broader question, which I think is very similar to what Jungo is exploring, which is the convergence of the natural and the artificial world. Now, having said that, I thought I'll bring on the table through data a question which is on everybody's mind. I will not show the work we're doing in our office today, but I will show some research we've been doing at MIT. And in particular, I know that, I was looking at the people who are connected today, and I think most of you probably are concerned about the following question. How will the office change post-COVID-19? And that is very relevant also to what we just saw by Jungo. If you're going to spend most of our lives at home, then, it's one thing. Cities are going to look very different than they look today. If you're going to go back to the offices, it's a different thing. And, if we're not going to go back to the office, the impact, economic impact and social impact and so on the city is going to be huge. Entire neighborhoods that were very active before the pandemic might end up in trouble. All the businesses serving, catering to them would be in trouble as well. Also, we might live much less rich lives by basically not interacting with people as we normally do in field. So I want to share with you this and put this on the table, and I'll tell you my answer to this question at the very end. But the first thing I want to say is let's find out with data. That's part of what you were saying, Philip, is about, today digital allows us to turn the artificial world into something that's almost alive, that happens through intelligence, that happens through big data. And a few years ago, I wrote an op-ed for the Harvard Business Review. The title they gave is, if work is digital, why do we still go to the office? And my point was actually there's still reasons to go to the office, but then the pandemic hit. In order to look at the changes, however, it's good to go back to the principles of planning. That's Le Corbusier in the 1930s, suggesting we should subdivide in a very rigid way all different parts of the city. Incidentally, we're working now on the master plan of Brasilia. As you know, Brasilia was built according to this principle by Le Corbusier. Like you see here to the left, the city where every district has a single function and is very well separated from the others. But as we know from Brasilia, that's in general not a very good idea. It creates a city which multiplies neighborhoods which are used only for part of the day. So no surprises, since the 1960s and so on, many people, including Jane Jacobs, looked at mixed-use developments, combining different functions together. And we believe that today, thanks to digital, we actually can start using space in a different way, multiple functions on the same space. Exactly what we experienced during the pandemic. The fact that we can, our kitchens became our offices. And then, our meeting rooms became other parts of our home. So somehow digital is making us more free to use space in a way that's changing the transition between public and private and the very structure of our buildings. But I told you, let's look at this with data. That's MIT campus. You see there the Charles River, MIT, Boston downtown. And MIT was one of the first universities to be totally covered by Wi-Fi, which produced a big change in the way people live and work, as you see to the left and to the right, and the same change we've seen globally. People used to work like this, now we tend to work like this. Incidentally, that's the design. This is the design for one of the leading, one of the largest co-working places in Europe that we designed a couple of years ago in Milan. So with data, we can actually, with Wi-Fi data, we can actually better understand the changes And here you see all the access points in the MIT campus that can tell you something very important for an architect, something we couldn't measure once upon a time, something that architects always dreamt of measuring, which is occupancy, but it wasn't possible before. What you see, every bubble tells you how many people you have. You know, Ildefonso Cerdà, the father of modern Barcelona, in his great theory of urbanization, he says, you know, well, you know, he dreams of a day when we'll be able to, through data, to look at cities through this lens of how a city works, like, you know, like you would do in physics. And so you see here the overall amount of people. You can skip a little bit fast on this, you know, how this can be integrated with cell phone data. And what you see here is the heartbeat of MIT as a whole, how people are distributed over time, but also the same curve can happen on every room. You see, for every room, you can see how it's been used, how many people you have in the course of the week. Every plot is a week. And then you analyze it. You go into big data, you analyze it, Fourier transform, clustering, and so on. And what you find is what I was telling you before, is the fact that we are using space in a more flexible way. A few decades ago, the map of MIT would have been a bit like Brasilia, with very different colors, very separated. Today, everything is mixing up. And you can look at also productivity and community and so on coming together. But let's get to the core of the question. We were measuring this with data before COVID, and then COVID hit. What happened to our social networks? Well, it turns out we were monitoring the MIT campus, all the email exchanges happening, anonymized, happening across campus. And then, you know, COVID becomes like an experiment. You remove physical space, people don't go to the office anymore. What happens to our social networks? So we started using the email network in order to try to understand the changes. By the way, here you see data exchange on the MIT campus before COVID and after COVID. You got 23rd of March, 2020, when MIT announces the closing of the campus. And, you know, we had data before and after. Here you see some of the connectivity on campus before the COVID emergency. That's the network of how people communicate. Incidentally, you see, you know, different groups, different clusters, including architecture, urban studies and planning, all the different schools. Go and myself, this is all anonymized data. They're probably part of this network of exchanging information on the MIT email network. And then you got COVID. And after COVID, lockdown, people don't go to campus anymore. And just visually, this changes. So you see it here, the same visualization is quite different. So what has changed? And we looked at many different things and we discovered something interesting. And the interesting is that in our social networks, we got something called weak ties. Weak ties are very important. Weak ties are people we know who are part of a different community and people who bring creativity to our network. Let me show it with a diagram. What you see here, the weak ties are the yellow one. The strong ties are people you know person A, you know person B, they're also friends with each other. But weak ties are people who are not friends of your friends, and they are bridges to another community. Well, in a paper I showed you a moment ago by Mark Granovetter, he discovered that weak ties are very, very important for the strength of our social network. They're very important for creativity. They're very important for productivity. You know, it really, they expose us to a different community inside our close friends who are all friends with each other. We keep on telling each other the same story. We don't learn anything new. But actually, new information usually comes from weak ties. Well, what is happening when you analyze all the data on the MIT campus is that, and here you see the big data analytics, is that the weak ties are disappearing. Weak ties are you know, becoming much, much weaker. Before the COVID, we had around 250 weak ties on the network being generated every day. And then after the 23rd of March, that number went down 80%, 80, to around 50 new weak ties per day. And that also shows you that, you know, our social network, that's a whole, another way to visualize the MIT network overall, And you see both in 2020, in February, before the pandemic, and then during the pandemic, you see it's almost like an network that's shrinking, where we have less resilience. It's almost like, a brain which starts to have issues. And well, so the bottom line of what I'm saying here is that because of this, we're pretty convinced that we'll go back to our offices. We need to go back, maybe not the whole week, maybe we'll keep flexibility, maybe we'll only do 1, 2, or 3 days, but we have to go back to our offices because that's where the richness of social interaction is generated. That's where our weak ties are generated, all those ties, those connections that actually allow us to be exposed to new ideas, to make sure that together we are more than each of us individually. And so I wrote this with, this is an article I did in Le Monde, where, the title in English is, despite all this co-working or this remote working, all the remote working, offices are not bad. So that's what I wanted to put on the table because, I was told we need to look at the city post the pandemic. And I, in a nutshell, I think our cities are going to change a lot. We need to be very creative, look at new ways to think about typologies, as Jungo was showing, and so on. But overall, I think we'll have to still make provisions for a lot of physical places of interaction outside of our home. This is not the city that people imagined a year ago when Twitter was saying work from home forever. It's a different city that, that we need to design together. And I'll stop it here.
Wonderful, Carlo. Thank you so much. That was very telling. And I didn't know the distinction between the strong ties and weak ties conceptually. That's a very interesting concept. And I wouldn't imagine that the weak ties are so important. But now the question, and I'm placing this question for both of you. I don't know whether we are in a situation in which the office is half full or half empty. In the end, we don't know whether we are going to. But I think we all agree that offices won't be as in the past. And then if offices are not going to be as in the past, all the retail places that surround the offices are not going to be the same way. So what do you think will be then the urban form in the future? Where are we heading to? And perhaps Junho could tell us a little bit. Do you think that Chinese cities in China are going to sprawl? Is the trend towards sprawling very strong in China in light of what is going on now? Was it sprawling before COVID, and is it keeping on sprawling after these phenomena?
As far as China is concerned, we have had urban sprawl for the past almost 40 years. So it's something that's just there. It's not new at all. I think the question we are facing is that not so much a person would just go to work if that's the idea of the office, but if a person need to work with others or not. And it really depends, I suppose, because for me, an architect, so our team, like you Carlo would know that very well. Our team is about putting our creativity together. It is not about, well, we do production of drawings and models and cars, but so working long distance, which happens a lot these days, is not adequate. So, okay, may not be necessary for us to meet every day in an office, but we need to meet really quite often. So this is one of the reasons to go to the office. The second reason is that it really depends on where your office is. If your office is really in the city, there are nice restaurants next door and a nice cafe, and if there's nice art gallery and so on. So going to the city to work, and then maybe going to a concert after work and so on, it becomes a lifestyle. So if you only spend 24 hours in a suburban house, you get your work done, I'm sure, more or less, but you don't get any of the offerings of the city. So I think that the way people would work together still can change a bit, but yet, on the other hand, face-to-face meeting and brainstorming together, and they're also part of the work experience. So in China, in Beijing, for instance, and for where our office is, and it's almost like an island, because the surrounding areas are not really in a very good shape, because there's a nice, exactly what I was saying, there's a nice art gallery, and they're showing the Japanese composer Sakamoto's work at this point. And then there are nice restaurants, bookstores, and the people come. And the organizers and would really plan everything well, so that people can come out. Even last year, to our neighborhood to enjoy the urban life. I guess I'm repeating myself a bit, but I do think city and city are different, office and office are different. So we should really somehow to achieve some kind of a quality of these physical spaces, so that we have good excuses to enjoy them and go to them. Okay, that's it for now. Yeah.
The levels of be able to flow the levels that flow up with the necessities, the necessary scale for
Philip,
all these.
Philip, yeah, we're losing.
Carlo,
Philip, we're losing you.
Yes, yeah, I can't hear you well either.
Yeah, we have lost Philip.
Hi, Professor Hachi and Professor Chang. Philip is right back in.
I'm
Philip,
back.
can you hear us? Okay.
Oh yes, I'm so sorry about that. There was some instability here. I was just commenting on Yunho's answer. I just hope, Yunho, that the level of the flows of people will be able to keep up with the necessary scale for these shops and the museums to live and to survive. This is a big question about the office life, whether everyone, the frequency of people in the offices will be able to hold up the necessary scale for the livability, the living other spaces like retails to survive. Thank you so much for your points. Carlo, let me ask you this. I know that you have been involved in the redesign of office spaces, and I was wondering whether what would happen if the demand for office spaces decline sharply, and there would be a number of idle spaces in very central areas. What would you do with idle space, with corporate areas that are no longer corporate, in case the demand for spaces, as it's happening now, declines sharply? What would you do with all this? Would you put, living spaces? Would you convert them into residential areas, or what would you do?
Yeah. Philip, it's a great question. We are seeing some cities who are trying to go in that way. As you know, also with you, we've been collaborating with with the city of Paris over the past few years, and helping with the Reinventing City, Réinventer Paris project. And the interesting thing is actually the latest round of Reinventer Paris, which was launched a few months ago, is actually planning on converting some office spaces into residential. So certainly that's something we are seeing in a few cities. But I think the bigger question here is, so let's go back to what we are saying. So we're going to still use our offices, probably 1, 2, or 3 days per week. So a bit less overall if you look at the whole week. But the activities we're going to do are going to be different. Let's face it, if we need to just respond to email, you know, if you had to respond to email 15 years ago, we had to go to the office because that's where we had our desktop computer. Now we can do that from home, from a lounge, from the countryside. So somehow it's many activities that we were doing in the office don't need to be in the office anymore. So that, as you say, means rethinking the office in a way that becomes a place more for interaction, for creating those weak ties that we don't get, you know, in if you just work remotely. And it has to be a different kind of architecture. Now, I think we don't have the final solution yet. I don't think also there's one solution fit all. It depends on, you know, if you're working in also in the industry sector, you know, what the specific activities that people do. But I think that there's a beautiful opportunity for all of us in architecture and design and so on is the following, to think about, well, how can we use a bit less space, depends on the type of company, but how can we rethink the interaction in the office so that we just 1, 2, or 3 days per week, we can actually generate the same amount, the same number of weak ties, we can actually sustain our social networks. And yes, you know, you're right, we've been working on this. I don't think there's a general answer to every problem, but we got a few very interesting designs we already implemented. We've been designing our first headquarters following the pandemic that really tries to incorporate this. And if I had to summarize all of this, I would say really the office lives becomes a different type of choreography, which is basically built around team building and socializing and communal interaction. So that becomes a very important thing that we need to build, even if we spend less time together.
Interesting, interesting. It is all very interesting the way you guys think and conceptualize things and how these thoughts interact with market forces. In the end, what I see on interacting with, you know, the developers and investors in the real estate realm, I think they react very much more slowly than the thinking goes. So we anticipate things, but then to convince market forces to go to this or that direction, this is there's always a very big mismatch. And let me place you a very broad question. Yes.
Just a quick comment on what you were saying is that traditionally, basically, city making has been very slow. And we could actually look at a lot of best practices. Best practices means you look at the past, you look at what worked, and you do the same thing in tomorrow. But actually looking at best practices means that you're locking the future into the past. You're looking at the past to build the future. I think we need to find a new way to think about innovation in our cities, which is more based on what happens with venture capital, with startups. So you try something small, you see how it goes, you expand it and so on. And I see that today, the most visionary real estate developers, think about, Rob Spire from Tishman Speyer in New York, they're actually going this way, taking risk in innovation with a model which is similar to what happens with IT companies and startups. So just a quick thought I wanted to add to what you said.
Yeah, that's interesting. But actually, Tishman Speyer is not exactly a startup, right? They are not that small. They have a huge capital behind them so that they can really test and investigate. I was wondering whether we could have this from smaller players in the market to see new forms. That's it's a stalemate, because for make something of urban impact, you need some scale, and sometimes smaller capital initiatives wouldn't have the necessary scale for develop something that would have an impact on the city level. But let's see how it will evolve. We are interacting with so many different size of actors, and it's going to be a very interesting experience in the coming months how they will move around along the trends that we are seeing. One question that I would like to ask, actually, I think Mariana will ask in more precise terms. I'm very concerned about the impact of COVID in the global South and in the impact of COVID on poverty. Mariana, I know that you have a question on this. Would you like to jump in and place the question?
Yes, Philip, thank you for inviting me back in. I would like to hear from our guests today about the relation between COVID-19 and the deepening of social inequalities. That is a phenomenon that we have been seeing in most countries, but here in Brazil is very acute. Does that have an impact on urban planning? For example, how do you see the future of the connection between the areas where lower classes live and how they go to their places of work, how they reach city centers? What is the impact of mobility and on urban planning for this kind of situation?
Okay,
the question is for both of you.
I can tell you what so inequality is here in China for sure. However, in the major cities, the gap of the poor and the rich is not as visible, which means that it's unlike India. I know it's like the major cities of India, like Mumbai. So you can see the big slums and so on, so that you can see people would have very, very different life because of the inequality and so on. And then for Chinese city is that maybe actually I'm making a case for density again. Maybe our cities are still relatively dense in the older quarters, so that most people can actually have access to public transportation, to shops, to hospitals, and so on. So that in a way, because of the spatial structure of the city, and then inequality doesn't play as big a part in this crisis. No, really, I'm not 100% sure if my observation is absolutely correct, but I think every day we're in and out and going around, and that seems to be possibly the case.
Thank you, Yunho. That's so interesting, because China's experience is very paradoxical. On the one hand, you had this huge poverty alleviation program, which is the most successful ever seen in history, right? And on the other hand, you have this deepening, yes, and then now you have this deepening inequality, which is very much on the rise. I think you have one of the most accelerated Gini coefficients around the world ongoing in China, for obvious reasons. How this will reflect in the urban organization, the territorial organization, is something that we need to see, and to see whether urban design can alleviate or can mitigate the effects of growing distancing, whether it's going to be more cities will be
Philip.
Yeah, Philip, we are losing you again.
Something looking at, not definition. Oh, perhaps I'm speaking too much. So I let you talk a little bit, Carlo, please.
Yeah, Philip, we lost you for the past minute and a half, so I wasn't really sure about which way you're going. But let me try to elaborate on something you said. which is about segregation. And I was very concerned about urban segregation exactly when people were saying, well, in the future, again, we will all work from home. You know, working from home means even less, you know, think about, you know, what happened, you know, working from home, having everything delivered to our apartments. That really is going to augment a lot segregation. Integration in the city really starts because we move to places where other people come together and people from different socioeconomic background and so on. So there's a lot of literature showing that parks, for instance, or schools are great places because they bring together people from all walks of life. And I was very concerned, you know, when this kind of new city emerged, that new idea of city emerged, more related to the fact, you know, people just, you know, staying in their neighborhood, in their home, doing everything from there, having everything delivered to their homes by Amazon and so on. So luckily, over a year after the beginning of COVID, this is not anymore the prevailing view, but I think it's our duty to really make this case, and, you know, as designers, as planners, to make sure that our cities have more and more opportunities for people to come together. That's the only way in which we can counter this kind of segregation. And that, you know, going back to the previous question, that is going to be particularly difficult. Let me just say something, some movement. Yeah, so sorry, I had to send some people away because there's a bit of noise. And I say that's particularly important as well when we look at disadvantaged communities who might suffer in a disproportionate way under such conditions. So again, as architects, as planners, we've got a big responsibility in order to create places that bring people together from all walks of life. That's where the value of a city really emerges as a place that bridges diversity, that bridges segregation.
That's a huge responsibility on the hands of urban planners and policymakers. And I was just saying when the line was cut that perhaps this is one huge responsibility on the Communist Party, because Communist Party holds so much centralized power, and China is seeing so much of a divide now in terms of income inequality. If planners could help shape cities in a way that people are more integrated and don't segregate, that would be a wonderful thing that policymakers could do in China in light of their concentration of power in one monolithic party. So that would be a great thing for having, at least from a centralized government.
Philip, I just wanted to say one thing, following what you're just saying. I think that one thing we should do, absolutely should do, I think it's not something we can actually put off, is to open up the gated communities for two reasons, right? For the social equality reason, but also for the city, for the entire city, to share all the resources, not to lock up. You know, that's like a permanent lockdown of the certain resources into one small community.
Yeah,
so we're really, it's something people started to talk about a lot, but we'll see if that could actually happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But again, people who live in those communities are not willing to open them. And market forces are very much willing to answer to their needs. Their supposedly imaginary needs. I don't think anybody and there's another question related to gated communities, is the carbon intensity of those communities. And I would like to perhaps ask you another question. It's a general question, but it could be perhaps specific in terms of the answer that you could give. Is there a silver bullet towards carbon neutrality of cities? Or there's not a silver bullet, there are a bunch of different things that people need to do in order to achieve carbon neutrality? Carlo, would you like to start, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm very happy to start. And actually, I will show you, we've been working, first of all, we think this is a big challenge. It's a challenge that all of us in this space should take very seriously. Most large cities across the planet, all the cities, for instance, in the C40 League of cities, you know, they're the biggest cities on the planet, around 100 of them. Then, you know, they want to be net zero carbon by 2050. And so, you know, and that's a 2050, some of them even earlier, you know, and that's a big challenge, especially for all of us engaged in designing, in thinking about cities, in doing research about cities, and so on. Now, I want to share with you, maybe I'll share just briefly an image, something we've been doing with the city of Helsinki. We recently won the Helsinki Energy Challenge. With this project, I think you see here, that's, well, I'll click on the article more, which is actually using this kind of floating reservoirs to store energy that can be used for district heating in the city. And at the same time, we try to create an urban experience above with different forests, floating tropical forests in Helsinki and so on. I'm sharing this because of two reasons. One was very interesting how the city decided to do it. The city was looking for the silver bullet of one solution. They actually got 250 participants in the challenge. They put like $1 million prize on the table. They got 250 participants from all over the world, 10 finalists. We were one of the finalist teams, and then in the end, 4 winners. We were one of the 4 winning teams now working with the city to implement the solution. But what I want to say is that they realized that it was not just one winner, one silver bullet. We really need to come together, look at many ideas and pull them together. So somehow, you know, that's the first part to the answer. The other part is that, you know, the answer that might work in Helsinki is certainly not the answer that might work in Dubai or in Rio de Janeiro or in Sao Paulo or in Recife for that matter. And so I think we really need to look at not only different silver bullets in the same city, but also different ones between one city and another one. And here, I really think that this is something where we should all come together as architects, designers, planners, develop ideas and follow this kind of new way of doing things we were hinting at before, which is not looking at best practices. The past will not help us. There's no solutions in the past we can adopt. We really need to innovate. And going back to what you were saying about, you know, a company such as Tishman Speyer is very large, but you can still apply this kind of startup mentality. When you try a bit of innovation at a small scale, we're doing a project with them in New York, you know, we're doing a small thing to test it, a slightly bigger one and then bigger one. So somehow, you know, we need to try new things while managing risk by going from small scale to bigger scale. So again, many possible solutions, many of them still to be invented, imagined all across the planet. Probably one of the biggest challenge of our generations. And we need to find a new way of doing things if we really want to tackle such a giant global issue.
I think one yes. possible silver bullet, in fact, is policy. For instance, in city of Beijing, there are a lot of people, including ourselves. We all drive electric cars, because if you have an old gasoline car, you can only drive 5 days out of a week, not 7 days. And then if you have an electric car, you can drive every day. So the incentive, these particular incentive, plus the fact now electricity is cheaper than gas anyway. And then people switch to electric cars. It works remarkably well. I think if the city or the government has a vision to implement some strategic policies, that would because ultimately it's about the change of lifestyle. So that I think that would be a very nice drive. I mean, a policy would encourage people to live with a smaller carbon footprint.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. And I think, Yunho, the risks of making mistakes having a centralized government are very high, but proportionally, the opportunities of having a centralized government are also very high. So if you have an enlightened government, it seems to be the case now, towards environmental solutions, that really can be a silver bullet. Let me take advantage of your answer, Yunho, to ask about, you know, autonomous vehicles, because I lived in Beijing in the 90s, and the city was still flooded with bicycles. It was a fantastic experience. Nowadays, I went back a few years ago, and then Beijing was flooded with cars, and not many places to park. And then in the hypothesis of that we reach the plateau of having autonomous vehicles, what would you do in Beijing or in Shanghai with the available parking lots? What uses you would make of them? Is that something that you ever thought about?
Well, yes. In fact, I think the streets, well, I don't even like to call them streets. The roads in Beijing or in Chinese cities in general are way too wide. So it's very hard to cross them. And also they don't help to ease the transportation, and often they work in the opposite way, and you just have more cars parked on these roads. So I think these spaces, very valuable urban spaces, should be liberated from cars. The streets of Beijing should be probably narrowed down to half of what they are today, and then use that space. We can imagine to have more commerce, more housing, more sports facilities and grounds. We don't have enough of all of these facilities, and yes, now we're using a great amount of it just for automobiles. I think that although as far as autonomous cars, I have my doubts. I have a feeling that there's going to generate more traffic. An empty car will go from one spot to some other spot to pick someone up and take him to a third spot and so on. So the traffic will be even worse. But I think in general, if autonomous vehicles could be developed as a form of public transportation, I think that would be really interesting. And then in connection with bicycles and maybe some other forms of individual transportational devices. So I think technology, although all along probably I don't sound like an MIT person very much, but I can see a lot of these technologies can be really used in a way that not just for the sake of efficiency, but really to help to up the just the quality of urban life. So now delivery in Beijing is a huge thing, as you can imagine. And those little mopeds, right? Some people would order breakfast, lunch, dinner on internet and then to be delivered to their apartment. But maybe we could have used drones instead of the mopeds. That would also ease the traffic bit. But I don't know if that create another big catastrophe in the air. But anyway, so I can see some of these technologies could help us at least to really reimagine how the life of the cities can be reorganized.
Sure. Yeah, and this is fascinating. I hope that we go towards that direction that you just mentioned, that autonomous vehicles become a part of a public service, not something private. That would help not for the autonomous vehicles not to become a force of sprawl. By the way, Carlo, I think that's a trend, right? That autonomous vehicles and drones and flying cars would drive cities towards, you know, the outskirts, and then that would worsen the situation of the urban footprint, right? What do you think? I think you have data on that. I think you wrote about this recently.
Yeah, there's actually two competing forces. You know, one force is you're right. You know, if you got an autonomous car, you can, for instance, you know, you can leave in the morning from home, you can sleep in the car, you can do other things. So, you know, even the commuting is longer, that's still acceptable. So I think, you know, you can have a force there towards sprawl, and actually that could be a force that reinforces what has been happening with COVID. So the fact that people can spend more time at home, and again, when you need to go to the city, to the main headquarters, if you are in a self-driving car, you can also tolerate a longer commute. At the same time, as you were saying, you know, the great thing about self-driving cars is that self-driving cars actually allow better sharing. You can use, today, a car is used 5% of the time on average, 95% is parked somewhere. And so if you have a self-driving car, you don't need to keep it parked. It can give you a lift in the morning and then give a lift to somebody else in your family or anybody else in the city. So that's a big advantage, is this kind of higher shareability, and shareability is proportional to density. So the denser the city, the more we can share. So you got these kind of two competing forces. One based on shareability, which actually makes self-driving more competitive in dense areas, in dense cities. And the other one, which is, yes, could be a force towards sprawling, which is the fact that you can spend longer into the car because you can use the car for sleeping or whatever you want. And then, you know, you could tolerate a longer commute. And I think to see what will, you know, which way we will go will depend really on policy. I agree with you, Ngo. You know, before in the previous question, you asked us, is there a silver bullet? I interpret it more like a technological silver bullet, which doesn't exist. There's many of them, and, you know, we need to change the bullets based on which city we are. But from a implementation point of view, yes, you know, policy can be a silver bullet. Before going to the previous question, you know, certainly, for instance, carbon pricing could be really the best way in order for us to get to net zero carbon all over the world, and you'll find different technical solutions, but trying to using carbon pricing as a policy. And in this case, again, you know, I think policy is what can tell us which way we'll go. For instance, if you were to put let me add just this kind of final point, is that, you know, today governments all over the world are making huge amount of money by actually having taxation on gas and you know, on cars, on the combustion engine and so on. Well, if tomorrow we move to electricity and self-driving cars, you know, a lot of those revenues are going to disappear. And a reasonable thing would be to think about putting taxation on miles traveled. So again, if you put taxes on miles traveled, maybe with an increase, with some kind of progressive taxation based on how many miles you travel, then there could be a very interesting incentive to counter some of the sprawl we talked about. And sprawl, going back to the previous points, I think sprawl is not only bad for some of the reasons we said, but sprawl is also has consequence on people's health. If you live in a sprawling city, you're less likely to walk or to cycle, which means, you know, you're more prone to obesity and many other things. And also, of course, sprawl means destroying usually very fertile landscape. Let's face it, you know, our cities have usually developed historically in places, in plains, which are very fertile. And if cities sprawl, we're going to kill and destroy a lot of earth surface that can be used productively for agriculture. And so we need to pay attention to that as the global population is growing still at an unprecedented rate. So somehow I still think that we should avoid sprawl, and policy can help us in that direction.
This is wonderful. I always remember the work done by the geographer Karin Seto at Yale. She says that, you know, projections are showing that the urban footprint in 2030 is going to be 30 times larger than the urban footprint that we had in year 2000. So it's a huge sprawl, and if we are unable to contain this, we are really in deep trouble. I'm looking at the watch now. I think we are heading towards the end of our time. I would like perhaps to make a last question, if you still have time, to both of you. I think one of the big issues of urban planning in the future has to do with big data and the counterpart or the dark side of it, which is the lack of privacy, the widespread use of artificial intelligence for sensible devices. I know that this is one of the top agendas for the Sensible Cities Lab at MIT. Both of you coming from the MIT, I would like very much to hear about your thoughts on privacy. I know that for the larger audience, this is a bit of a more abstract topic. I think it's one of the central issues for the coming years for us to deal with. Carlo, would you start with this?
I just wanted to say, Carlo did an exhibition, or rather biennial in Shenzhen on that particular subject.
Oh, that's right. I think you curated that biennial, right, Jung-ho? That was one of the topics. Excellent.
Actually, it's a Shenzhen biennial, and Jung-ho curated one of the first one. I still remember very fondly when with Jung-ho and Adele Santos and the team from MIT, Jung-ho took us to visit it. That was back in, what was it, 2005 or something like that, Jung-ho? Yes, when you curated it.
2005.
Yeah. 2005, and then I had the privilege to curate it just before the pandemic. And really what we wanted to talk about was really about the point about data. Well, just three very quick comments. The first comment is that, there's no intelligence without data. There's no artificial intelligence without data. So data is vital if you want to move to more intelligent systems in wherever we embed them, in the city or in whichever other thing. At the same time, data and the ownership of data is a crucial dimension of democracy, and how can we manage data, who has control of the data is very, very important, so we should all be aware of that. And one of the things that came out of the Shenzhen Biennale, well, actually, Jung-ho did a beautiful installation related to really changing the point of view or perspective of people visually. I think, again, related to facial recognition and use of visual information in cities. So Jung-ho contributed with a very interesting, very nice piece of design to the Biennale we had a year and a half ago in Shenzhen. And the point there that came out, however, of the Biennale as a whole is that, we need more transparency and more citizen engagement. For instance, what we allowed at the Biennale was people could decide if they wanted to be part of the system or not. Together with the Dutch architects MVRDV, we designed the entry pavilion where people could decide if they wanted to be part of the facial recognition system or not. And also with the Cooper Union in New York, we actually designed a system where you put a little thing on your forehead that would actually, again, allow you to become invisible towards technology. Somehow, what I want to say here is that we need more and more forums where we can let people understand better what's going on, making technology more transparent, and decide how much we want to part of such new systems. Again, these are 3 points. First, we need data if we want to have a more intelligent society. But second point, data also puts on the table very important issues, crucial issues about control, ownership, and that's not only from government. It's also big companies who know everything about you and you know very little about them. And then the third point, really, that we need to make, in any case, this more like a conversation, a more transparent system. And that's what we try to do at Biennale, where we really saw that there's a great need and desire from people to really be involved in this conversation.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear. And transparency is the issue, but how to make it transparent? Whenever I see a policy, cookie policy agreement in my screen, and I need to click it, and I see that there's a 20-page agreement for me to read, this is not transparency at all. So, but that's a big challenge. I don't know, Mariana, I think you would like to place a question. There's a question around. Would you like to jump in with another question?
Yes, thank you, Felix. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce a topic that relates to CEBRI's mission as a think tank of international relations. As we have said by your presentation, we have to always consider the specificities of each city and each place and each reality. So how do you think we could extract better gains from this connection between local solutions and the possibility of international cooperation for effective urban planning?
Wow, this is a big question. Maybe Carlo does, but I don't really have an answer. But all I know is that for different localities, for different individuals, it's very important that not to take in a lot of information and then following the trend and so that as a way to be with the so-called maybe progress, technologically speaking, or in some other ways. I think that we should, although also it's very, very difficult, but we should able to make the decision exactly because of the technology available today to decide to live in an era in a way with a lifestyle that we so wish. Which means if I don't like many things beyond 1960, I would prefer to live in the era before that. Probably at least conceptually, I should be able to. And in order to do so, maybe actually I use technology to access the information I'm interested in and so on. So I think that's probably how I see it for an individual to be an individual rather to be a number of the big data.
Yeah, fantastic. This question raises a number of others that are very interesting. Many problems, Mariana, that we are facing today are dealt better at subnational levels, right? So many things that countries are incapable of dealing with, cities are dealing with a lot of competence. So I think there are many topics in which we need to decentralize for cities. And then in this sense, I think international cooperation among cities would be a great thing for us to foster. On the other hand, there are a number of global topics that need to be dealt by nation. So this is a big tension between globalization and localization. So that's the so-called localization that we need to find the equilibrium for governance, like better governance. But yeah. I think we need, unless Carlo would like to jump in. Yes?
No, I just want to say something.
Yes, Carlo.
Something just very quickly based on what you say, that Philip, is that, nation states are certainly a relatively recent construct. They are 100 to 100-year-old, and they fulfill a very important function in that world. But what we are seeing is going back, to the primary unit of human organization. If you look at the world, if you look at our planet from the sky, you see all of our cities. You don't see during the night, those beautiful pictures with lights. Well, you see cities, you don't see nation states. And so somehow I think that now with the need for both a higher governance at the global level, we're also seeing more and more devolution at the city level. And it's no surprise that, sometimes when you look at these kind of summits of mayors, they're like summits of head of states, and sometimes, they got more power, as you see what happened during COVID in some countries like the US, more power than the federal or national government. So just weak thoughts. And I think we've been seeing this for a few years now, but it seems that this is going to continue as nation states are eroded and power is devoluted both higher up and at the lower level.
Very interesting, very interesting. Perhaps we are going towards revolution and devolution at the same time. So let me tell you guys this. It's been
Jungo and I are always ready to do revolution. So very happy to follow.
Very good. Excellent, excellent. This has been a fascinating dialogue. Then it's very unfortunate that we have to close this because we are going beyond the scheduled time. But it's been a privilege for us to hear you guys, and I'm sure this exchange is going to inspire many of us, from citizens to urban planners to professional politicians, in our efforts to improve the quality of cities. Let me once again thank you so much for your time, your ideas, your inspiration, and I really look forward to another round of conversations with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mariana, for hosting us.
Thank you, Mariana.
Thank you, Professor Chang. Thank you, Professor Haiti. And I would like to thank you again, the support of BOCOM BBM, for making the China Analysis Group running for so long. And see you in the next meeting, in the next opportunity.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye.